I still remember the exact moment my niece decided I would be the joke of the evening. It happened halfway through dinner when Ashley leaned back in her chair, lifted her glass of sparkling water, and said with a bright smile that carried across the table, "Well, Aunt Margaret probably wouldn't understand any of this anyway." Finance has changed a lot since her time. A few of her friends laughed politely, the kind of laughter people give when they want to stay on the good side of the person paying the bill. I simply smiled and took a slow sip of my iced tea, letting the clink of the glass against the table fill the silence that followed. The restaurant was one of those polished places downtown, with low amber lighting and white tablecloths so crisp they looked ironed by hand. The kind of place where the servers spoke softly and the menu listed ingredients instead of dishes. Ashley had invited everyone to celebrate her promotion at a consulting firm, and judging by the designer handbags draped over chair backs and the phones resting beside half-finished appetizers, she wanted the evening to feel impressive. I had dressed simply, a navy blouse and a pearl necklace my late husband had given me years ago, because I believed this was just a family dinner with a few of her colleagues. Apparently, Ashley had other plans. Throughout the evening, she spoke quickly and confidently about markets, venture funding, and the importance of understanding modern money. Each time she glanced in my direction, the corner of her mouth lifted slightly, as if she were performing for an audience. When one of her friends asked who had helped Ashley get through college, she shrugged casually and said, "Oh, I pretty much figured things out on my own." I noticed the quick shift in the conversation then, the way people nodded as though they admired her independence. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. I simply folded my hands together on the table and watched the candlelight flicker in the center of the table. The truth was that I had paid for most of Ashley's tuition after her parents passed away. I had sat through meetings with guidance counselors, filled out financial forms, and written more checks than I could count to make sure she had every opportunity they would have wanted for her. None of that needed to be mentioned tonight. Ashley was enjoying her moment. She leaned toward one of her friends and continued explaining how important it was to control your own money instead of letting family manage it. That line drew a few more laughs, louder this time, and someone joked about old relatives who still balance checkbooks with pencils. Ashley laughed the loudest of all. I placed my napkin carefully beside my plate and allowed myself another quiet smile. What Ashley didn't realize, what none of them at that table understood, was that the story she was telling about independence had a very different ending than she imagined. Because the inheritance Ashley often hinted about, the family money she assumed would simply appear in her account one day, had never been placed directly in her name. Years earlier, when the estate lawyers finalized the documents after her parents' accident, a trust had been established to protect that money until Ashley turned 30. It was a responsible decision meant to give her time to grow into the kind of person who could handle it wisely. And the person appointed to oversee that trust, to approve every investment, every withdrawal, every financial request tied to that inheritance, happened to be sitting quietly at the far end of the table with a glass of iced tea and a calm expression. Me. The waiter arrived with the main courses just as the laughter around the table began to fade into smaller conversations. Plates were set down carefully, and the soft clink of silverware against porcelain filled the space for a moment. Ashley had ordered grilled salmon with lemon butter and roasted vegetables. Something she mentioned was this smart choice for people who actually think about their health. Her friends nodded approvingly. I had chosen something simple, a small portion of chicken and steamed vegetables, because large dinners had never been very appealing to me. I noticed Ashley glance at my plate briefly before turning back to her audience. She continued describing the projects she was leading at her firm, explaining how quickly her career was advancing and how she expected to be managing an entire team before the end of the year. One of her colleagues asked how she had learned so much about investing at such a young age. Ashley lifted her shoulders casually and said she had always had a natural instinct for money. According to her story, she had built everything from the ground up with determination and discipline. I listened quietly while the candlelight flickered across the tablecloth. What fascinated me was not the exaggeration in her words, but the certainty in her voice. Ashley believed the story she was telling. To her, the long years of quiet support that had shaped her opportunities had become invisible. When she spoke about independence, she truly thought she had done everything alone. One of the younger women at the table leaned forward and asked whether Ashley planned to start investing in property soon. Ashley smiled and said she had already been thinking about buying a condo downtown. She spoke about market trends and rising values with the confidence of someone who expected money to appear whenever she needed it. Then she added another comment that caused a few people to laugh again. She said that older relatives often worried too much about controlling money instead of letting younger people take risks. I could see her eyes move briefly in my direction again. The comment was gentle on the surface, but the meaning underneath it was clear enough. I rested my hands calmly beside my plate and continued listening. Years of experience had taught me that people reveal the most about themselves when they believe no one is quietly paying attention. The conversation moved on to travel plans, career goals, and the newest restaurants opening across the city. Ashley dominated most of the discussion, leaning back comfortably as she described the lifestyle she expected to build within the next few years. At one point she mentioned that once certain family funds became available, she intended to invest aggressively. The phrase caught my attention because she said it with the confidence of someone who believed access to that money was only a matter of time. In her mind, the inheritance had already become part of her future. I wondered if she had ever taken the time to read the legal documents connected to it. My guess was that she had not. Most people assume money will arrive without conditions when they hear the word inheritance. They rarely imagine the quiet structures designed to protect it. The waiter returned to refill our water glasses, and for a moment the table fell into a comfortable silence. Ashley took another sip of her drink and glanced around the group with the easy confidence of someone who believed the evening was going exactly the way she wanted. She had impressed her friends, entertained her colleagues, and positioned herself as the most successful person at the table. I allowed myself another small smile and looked down at the candle burning between the plates. Ashley thought the evening was a performance she controlled, but in truth, she was only halfway through a conversation she did not yet understand. The conversation drifted naturally after that, the way dinner conversations often do when people feel comfortable and slightly impressed with themselves. Someone ordered another round of drinks, and the warm light from the hanging fixtures reflected softly across the polished glasses. Ashley seemed completely at ease now. She had the attention of the entire table, and she knew it. When people are certain they are admired, they begin to speak more freely, and that was exactly what happened next. One of her colleagues asked about her long-term plans, whether she intended to stay with the consulting firm or eventually start her own company. Ashley smiled thoughtfully as if she had already considered every possibility. She explained that she was not worried about financial security because she had several advantages that other young professionals did not. She said that good planning and smart family decisions had positioned her well for the future. The words sounded responsible on the surface, but the tone underneath them carried a different message. She wanted everyone at that table to believe she had always been destined for success. I noticed the way she leaned back in her chair while speaking, confident and relaxed, as if the entire room belonged to her. One of the men at the table laughed and asked if that meant she had wealthy relatives supporting her ambitions. Ashley waved her hand dismissively and replied that family support could only take someone so far, especially when older relatives insisted on controlling things they did not fully understand. The sentence floated across the table lightly, but its meaning settled directly in my direction. A few of her friends glanced at me politely before looking away again. No one wanted to become involved in an uncomfortable moment. I simply folded my napkin neatly beside my plate and listened. What Ashley did not realize was that she had just revealed something important about how she viewed the world. In her mind, the people who had helped her reach this point were obstacles rather than partners. She saw guidance as interference. She saw responsibility as restriction. That kind of thinking is surprisingly common among young professionals who experience success quickly. Confidence grows faster than perspective. The waiter cleared the plates and offered dessert menus, and Ashley immediately recommended the chocolate soufflé, explaining that the restaurant was known for it. Her friends agreed enthusiastically. While they discussed dessert options, Ashley turned slightly toward me and spoke in a softer voice that only the two of us could hear clearly. She asked whether I had enjoyed the evening and whether I had learned anything new about how modern finance worked. The question sounded polite, but the small smile on her face suggested she expected a certain kind of answer. I returned the smile calmly and told her that listening carefully can teach a person many things. Ashley nodded as if she found the comment amusing, then turned back to her friends to continue describing her upcoming projects at work. The conversation grew louder again, filled with stories about office politics, travel plans, and investment opportunities. I watched Ashley speak with enthusiasm, and for a moment I remembered the quiet young woman she had been 10 years earlier when she first arrived at my house, carrying 2 suitcases and a scholarship acceptance letter. She had been nervous then, unsure about the future, grateful for every opportunity. Life had changed her quickly. Success can do that to people. It can make them forget who stood beside them when the path ahead was still uncertain. Ashley believed tonight was another step forward in her career and social life, another opportunity to show the world how capable she had become. What she did not realize was that the most important conversation of the evening had not happened yet. That moment was still waiting quietly, just beyond the laughter and the dessert menus, and when it arrived the tone of the entire night would change in a way she had never expected. The dessert menus arrived a few minutes later, printed on thick cream-colored paper with elegant lettering that matched the quiet atmosphere of the restaurant. Ashley picked one up and began recommending options to her friends, as though she had personally curated the entire menu. She described the chocolate soufflé again, explaining that it took 15 minutes to prepare because it had to be baked fresh. Her friends seemed impressed, nodding and smiling while the waiter stood patiently beside the table. I closed my menu without studying it for very long. After many years of dinners and celebrations, I had learned that the food itself was rarely the most important part of evenings like this. The real moments happened in the quiet spaces between conversations. Ashley noticed my closed menu and raised one eyebrow slightly. She asked if I was sure I did not want dessert because, according to her, the restaurant was known for modern interpretations of classic recipes. I thanked her politely and said that a cup of coffee would be perfect for me. She smiled again in that same bright way she had used all evening and told the waiter to bring several soufflés for the table along with a single coffee for her aunt. The comment was delivered lightly, but I could see one of her friends glance at me with a hint of curiosity. Small gestures reveal more about people than long speeches ever do. While the waiter walked away, Ashley leaned forward and continued speaking about financial strategies, describing the difference between people who understand wealth and people who simply save money. According to her explanation, true success came from confidence and bold decisions rather than cautious planning. She said that younger professionals had a natural advantage because they were willing to take risks that older generations could not understand. A few people nodded again, and one of them asked Ashley how she had developed such a strong sense of financial independence so early in life. Ashley laughed softly and explained that she had always believed in controlling her own future. She said that relying on family guidance often slowed people down because older relatives worried too much about security. The words were spoken casually, almost playfully, but the meaning behind them settled over the table like a quiet echo. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip while the conversation continued around me. The truth was that Ashley had grown up surrounded by careful planning. After her parents passed away, every major decision regarding her education, housing, and finances had been organized through long meetings with lawyers and financial advisors. Those meetings had not been glamorous or exciting, but they had built a structure designed to protect her future. I remembered sitting in a quiet office many years ago while the estate attorney explained the details of the trust that had been established for Ashley. He had spoken carefully about responsibility, about patience, and about the importance of waiting until the right moment to place that kind of financial control in someone's hands. The documents had been signed slowly and deliberately. Ashley had been only 18 at the time, far more interested in starting college than understanding legal paperwork. Tonight, she spoke as if the money connected to those documents already belonged entirely to her. When the desserts finally arrived, the chocolate soufflés looked beautiful, rising several inches above their ceramic cups with powdered sugar lightly dusted across the tops. Everyone admired them for a moment before breaking into laughter again. Ashley lifted her spoon and continued describing the future she expected to build within the next few years. Listening to her speak, I realized she believed the path ahead was already guaranteed. The only thing she had not yet discovered was that the future she imagined still required one small element she had overlooked completely: my approval. The chocolate soufflés slowly collapsed as the warm air of the restaurant touched their delicate tops, and the conversation around the table softened into the kind of comfortable noise that follows dessert. Ashley seemed pleased with herself. She laughed easily, leaning toward her friends while describing a conference she planned to attend in Chicago later that year. According to her story, it would be the perfect opportunity to meet investors and build the kind of connections that accelerate careers. One of her colleagues asked if she planned to expand her investments soon, especially with the housing market shifting the way it had recently. Ashley nodded confidently and said she had already begun thinking about larger financial moves. She explained that real opportunities come to people who are willing to act quickly. Then she added that she expected a significant amount of capital to become available to her within the next few years, which meant she would finally be able to invest the way serious professionals do. The statement caught the attention of several people at the table. They asked polite questions about timing and planning, and Ashley answered each one with growing enthusiasm. Listening to her speak, anyone would assume that the resources she described were already waiting inside her bank account. I sat quietly with my coffee, watching the steam rise slowly from the cup. The truth was that Ashley had heard fragments of information about her inheritance over the years, but had never asked enough questions to understand how it was structured. When her parents passed away, the attorneys had explained that the estate would be placed inside a carefully managed trust. The purpose was simple. The funds would remain protected until Ashley reached the age of 30. Giving her time to build maturity and experience before gaining full control. Until that moment arrived, every financial decision connected to the trust required approval from the appointed trustee. Ashley had nodded through those explanations years ago without much interest. She had been eager to begin college, eager to start the life she imagined waiting ahead of her. Most 18-year-olds do not spend much time thinking about legal structures or fiduciary responsibility. As the evening continued, Ashley turned slightly toward me again while her friends focused on the last bites of dessert. In a quieter voice, she mentioned that she would soon begin preparing for some larger financial steps and might need help reviewing a few documents when the time came. Her tone suggested that she believed the process would be simple, almost automatic. I listened carefully and nodded once. I told her that reviewing documents is always a wise idea because financial decisions should never be rushed. Ashley smiled politely at that response, though I could tell she found the advice a little unnecessary. From her perspective, the future was already arranged exactly the way she wanted. What fascinated me most was not her confidence, but the gap between her expectations and reality. At that very moment, the legal authority connected to her inheritance remained exactly where it had always been, unchanged and quietly documented inside a folder that had been stored in my office for years. Every investment tied to that trust, every withdrawal request, every financial decision linked to that money passed through one signature before anything else could happen. Mine. Ashley lifted her glass again and toasted to new opportunities, to ambition, and to what she described as complete financial independence. Her friends raised their glasses and repeated the toast enthusiastically. I lifted my coffee cup gently and returned the gesture with a calm smile, knowing that the word independence can mean very different things depending on who is speaking and who is listening. The waiter cleared the empty dessert cups and placed the check discreetly on the edge of the table, but no one reached for it right away. Ashley was still in the middle of another story, describing how her firm had recently closed a deal that involved several $1 million in consulting work. Her voice carried the same confident rhythm it had all evening, the tone of someone who believed she understood exactly how the financial world operated. Her friends listened with interest, occasionally asking questions that allowed her to explain more about the strategies she had been learning. At one point, one of them asked how someone at the beginning of their career could position themselves for long-term wealth. Ashley answered immediately, explaining that the key was access to capital and the courage to move quickly when opportunities appeared. She said that hesitation was the reason many people stayed ordinary. I watched the conversation carefully, noticing the way Ashley spoke about money as if it were already sitting within her reach. Then one of her colleagues leaned forward and asked the question that quietly shifted the direction of the evening. He asked whether Ashley planned to use family resources to begin investing earlier than most young professionals. Ashley laughed lightly and said that family money existed, but it was only a small detail compared to her own ambition. She explained that once she gained access to the inheritance her parents had left behind, she would finally have the freedom to invest the way she wanted. The table became slightly quieter as people listened more closely. Several of them seemed impressed. Large inheritances have a way of changing how people view someone's future. Ashley continued speaking, describing potential real estate investments, startup funding, and international travel connected to business opportunities. I took another slow sip of coffee and allowed her words to continue without interruption. What she described sounded very exciting, but it also revealed how little she understood about the structure protecting that inheritance. When Ashley finished explaining her plans, she finally turned directly toward me with a polite expression. She said she would probably need my help soon because certain paperwork connected to the family estate might need to be reviewed before anything could move forward. Her tone suggested she believed my role was simply administrative, something small that could be completed quickly once she asked. I placed my coffee cup carefully on the table and met her eyes with a calm smile. I told her that paperwork connected to a trust always deserves careful attention because the responsibilities involved are more complicated than most people realize. Ashley nodded politely, but I could see she did not expect any real difficulty. From her perspective, the inheritance was simply waiting for the right moment to be transferred into her control. One of her friends asked if that meant she would soon become a serious investor. Ashley answered confidently that the moment was approaching faster than anyone expected. Listening to her speak, I understood that she believed the path ahead was completely clear. The truth was that the next step in that process did not depend on timing, market conditions, or even the documents she mentioned. It depended on something much simpler and far more personal. Respect. Because before any dollar connected to that trust could move, before any investment could begin, before any dream Ashley described could become reality, there was a quiet signature that had to appear at the bottom of the authorization forms. And that signature belonged to the woman sitting quietly across from her at the dinner table. The check remained resting quietly on the edge of the table while the last pieces of conversation slowly faded into a comfortable silence. Ashley leaned back in her chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the evening had gone exactly as planned. Her friends were impressed, the restaurant had been elegant, and the stories about her career had painted the picture she wanted them to see. One by one they began reaching for their coats and phones, talking about early meetings the next morning and rides back to their apartments. The waiter returned to collect the payment, and Ashley picked up the folder before anyone else could reach for it. She waved her hand lightly and said that tonight was her celebration, so she would take care of everything. Her friends thanked her, smiling as they gathered their things. When the bill had been settled and the table began to empty, Ashley remained standing beside her chair for a moment, glancing at me with the same polite smile she had worn all evening. She told her friends she would join them outside in a few minutes because she wanted to speak with me privately for a moment. They nodded casually and walked toward the entrance, leaving the quiet corner of the restaurant almost completely empty. Ashley returned to her seat across from me and folded her hands on the table. The confident tone in her voice softened slightly now that the audience had disappeared. She said that she had been meaning to talk with me for a while about the financial documents connected to her inheritance. According to her understanding, certain age milestones were approaching, and she wanted to begin planning how the funds would be used once they were transferred. She explained that her advisors at work had recommended she begin reviewing the paperwork soon so that investments could start immediately after the transfer was finalized. While she spoke, I listened without interrupting, allowing her to finish every sentence. When she paused, I asked calmly whether she had ever taken the time to read the original trust documents prepared by the estate attorney years ago. Ashley hesitated for a brief second and admitted that she had only seen a summary. She explained that the lawyers had handled most of the details at the time and that she assumed the structure was straightforward. From her perspective, the inheritance was simply waiting for the correct birthday before it became fully accessible. I nodded slowly and told her that legal structures surrounding family trusts are rarely as simple as they appear on the surface. Ashley leaned forward slightly and asked if there was anything complicated she needed to know before speaking with her financial advisors. The question carried a hint of impatience, as if she expected a quick explanation followed by a simple signature. I looked at the nearly empty restaurant for a moment before returning my attention to her. The quiet lighting reflected softly across the polished table between us, and for the first time that evening the conversation felt completely calm. I told Ashley that the trust established by her parents had been designed with a very specific purpose. It was not only meant to preserve the money until she reached the appropriate age, but also to ensure that any major financial decisions were guided responsibly until that moment arrived. Ashley listened carefully now, the earlier confidence in her expression beginning to shift into curiosity. She asked who had been responsible for overseeing those decisions all these years. I held her gaze calmly and allowed a small pause to settle between us before answering. I explained that every trust requires a trustee, someone legally responsible for protecting the assets and approving any movement of the funds. Ashley nodded slowly, clearly assuming that the role belonged to a law firm or financial institution she had never met. Then she asked the question that had been quietly waiting all evening. She asked who that trustee was. I rested my hands gently on the table and answered with the same calm tone I had used throughout dinner. I told her that the trustee responsible for every dollar connected to her inheritance had been sitting across from her the entire evening. For a moment, Ashley simply stared at me as if she had not heard the sentence correctly. The quiet hum of the restaurant filled the space between us while the last few diners finished their meals across the room. Her expression shifted slowly from polite curiosity to confusion. She blinked once and let out a small laugh that sounded uncertain. She said that she did not quite understand what I meant. I remained calm and repeated the explanation in the same steady tone. I told her that when the estate attorneys created the trust after her parents passed away, they had appointed a trustee responsible for managing the funds until she reached the required age. The trustee was not a bank and it was not a corporation. It was a person the family trusted to protect her future until she was ready to handle the responsibility herself. Ashley leaned forward slightly now, the earlier confidence completely gone from her posture. She asked why no one had ever mentioned that detail to her before. I reminded her gently that the attorneys had explained everything during the meetings years ago, but at the time she had been eager to begin college and had not been interested in the legal language surrounding the documents. The room remained quiet while she processed the information. I could see the realization beginning to form behind her eyes. She asked again who had been serving in that role all these years. I held her gaze calmly and answered in the simplest way possible. I told her that I had been responsible for managing the trust since the day the documents were signed. Every investment connected to the account had been reviewed through my approval. Every withdrawal for tuition, housing, and living expenses had passed through my authorization. The structure had been designed that way so the money would remain secure until the moment she turned 30. Ashley sat back slowly in her chair. The confident energy she had carried throughout the evening seemed to fade as the meaning of my words settled in. She asked quietly whether that meant the funds she had been discussing with her colleagues were not actually accessible yet. I explained that the trust allowed limited distributions for education and necessary expenses, but any large financial movement required careful review from the trustee before it could happen. Ashley looked down at the table for several seconds, thinking through everything she had said earlier in the evening. I did not interrupt the silence. Moments like that deserve time. After a while she asked another question, this time with a much calmer tone. She asked whether the plans she had been describing about real estate investments and new ventures would also require approval. I nodded once and explained that the purpose of a trust is not to block opportunity, but to protect long-term stability. The funds were meant to support her future, not to disappear through decisions made too quickly. Ashley let out a slow breath and leaned back again, absorbing the full picture for the first time. The restaurant lights reflected softly across the empty plates and folded napkins between us. The entire evening had been built around a story she believed about her independence, but the reality was far more structured than she had imagined. I took a final sip of my coffee and rested the cup gently on the table. Ashley looked up at me again, this time with a completely different expression than the one she had worn when the evening began. There was no laughter now and no performance for an audience. Only understanding, because she had finally realized something very important about the inheritance she had been describing so confidently all night. Every dollar of it moved only after I said yes. The quiet between us lasted longer this time. Ashley sat still with her hands resting on the table, staring at the reflection of the restaurant lights on the polished surface as if she were trying to rearrange the entire evening in her mind. The confident version of the night she had imagined was no longer there. Instead, there was a new understanding settling in, piece by piece, connecting every sentence she had spoken earlier with the reality she had just learned. Finally, she looked up at me again. Her voice was softer now, careful in a way it had not been before. She asked why I had never mentioned the details of the trust sooner. I answered honestly. I told her that the structure had never been a secret, but it was not something that needed to be announced either. The documents had been explained years ago, and the purpose of a trust is quiet responsibility rather than public attention. Ashley nodded slowly, as if replaying those old meetings in her memory. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The restaurant was nearly empty now, the staff quietly resetting tables across the room for the next day. Ashley glanced toward the door where her friends had been waiting earlier, and then back toward me. She admitted that she had assumed the inheritance would simply transfer into her accounts once she reached the appropriate age. I told her that assumption was common. Many people believe money is only about ownership, but real financial security is often about stewardship. The trust was created so that the wealth her parents left behind would support her entire life, not just the first exciting opportunities that appeared. Ashley listened carefully this time. There was no impatience in her expression anymore. She asked whether the decisions she had been discussing earlier would still be possible in the future. I told her that possibility was exactly what the trust had been designed to protect. The funds were not meant to stop her ambitions, but they required thoughtful planning before being placed at risk. Ashley exhaled slowly, absorbing the explanation. Then she surprised me by offering a small, quiet apology. She said that earlier in the evening, she might have spoken about money and experience in a way that sounded dismissive. I accepted the apology with a calm smile. I told her that confidence is not a bad thing, but confidence becomes much stronger when it is balanced with perspective. Ashley nodded again, this time with genuine understanding. For the first time that evening, there was no performance, no audience, and no need to impress anyone. It was simply a conversation between two people who both cared about the same future. I stood up slowly and reached for my coat, feeling the cool air from the entrance as someone opened the door across the room. Ashley remained seated for a moment before standing as well. She looked different now, more thoughtful than before. As we walked toward the exit together, she asked one final question. She asked whether the trust would always require my approval for every decision. I told her that my role would continue until the moment the documents allowed the responsibility to pass fully into her hands. Until then, the purpose of the trust remained exactly the same as it had always been. Protection. Ashley nodded quietly as we stepped outside into the cool night air where the city lights stretched across the street. Her friends were waiting a few yards away, still talking and laughing. Ashley looked toward them and then back at me with a thoughtful expression. The evening had begun with her trying to show everyone how little I understood about money. It ended with her realizing something far more important. Respect is often worth more than the wealth people argue about, and the people who protect your future are rarely the ones you should try to impress.